So when will it be time for you to give yourself over to God? I'm Zach. This is The Average Christian looking at Haggai chapter 1, asking a simple question for you. These people were asked the same question that I'm going to give you. I give you a little bit of background here. And once again, the question is, when will it be time for you to give yourself over completely to God? And we'll define what that means. These people had been sent back from captivity and to Jerusalem by volunteer, in a voluntary nature. They were allowed to go back. These people chose to return to a burned down, destroyed city to rebuild the temple of God. So they come back, they set up the altar first and start worshiping again. They're finally free of this captivity. They lay a foundation. Trouble comes, as always does, because Satan's always going to do his work. And these people are told to stop, and they do, and they stop for about a period of 15 years, and Haggai shows up on the scene, and he's got a message for him. Now, it is in verse 2 that you find out their mentality here. Thus says the Lord of hosts, these people say the time has not yet come to rebuild the house of the Lord. Now, that didn't make any sense in the first place, because that's why they were sent. That's the only job you had, was do what God says. And they say, well, it's not time yet. Why? Because there's opposition there? Well, there's always going to be opposition. Why? Because you're busy. Well, you find out here in verse 4, he says in verse 3, before we get to that, then the word of the Lord came by the hand of Haggai the prophet. Is it time for you yourselves to dwell in your paneled houses while this house lies in ruins? The whole point of you being here was to build the temple of God. Now that's lying in waste, in ruins. The materials that have been brought are rotting away, and now they're not just living in houses, they're living in luxury. That's paneled, or in your version when you're reading it says sealed houses. That means they're living above necessity, and they've gotten into luxury. So you don't have time to do God's work of rebuilding this temple, but you got plenty of time for your life. Sound familiar? It does to me, because I've got so much stuff to do. I got so many things to accomplish. I got so many places to go. And everybody at every stage in our culture has something more to do. When I graduate high school, when I get married, when I graduate college, when I finally get this job, when I get my family established and started, when I retired, and over and over and over, it's always something else. And the idea here given in verse 5 and verse 7 is to stop and think about your ways. Consider your ways. He says it once in verse 5, calls them to check their hearts, to evaluate life. We've been told over and over to examine ourselves. Consider your ways, he says. Now watch this. You have sown much and harvested little. You eat, but you never have enough. You drink, but you never have your fill. You clothe yourselves, but no one is warm. You know what he's saying? It's never, ever going to be enough. Your way of life and what you think is so important, and you have an example in the Bible, in Ecclesiastes. If you read that book, that's somebody that had everything, Solomon, at his disposal, and there was never, ever enough. And the end of it was that everything's just vanity. This is just all a waste of time. That's exactly what he's saying here. You plant, but you don't reap enough. You eat, but you're never filled. You drink, but you're never full. You clothe yourselves, but it's never enough to keep warm. You're always going to be filling this hole. And what he says here, by the way, is he who earned wages does so to put them in a bag with holes, which he just demeans everything they were about. You have wasted your life. What a horrible thing to go to judgment and God look at me or look at you and say, you have wasted your life. I put you here for a purpose, and you ignored that purpose and did everything else in the world besides that. And you did a little bit of church over here and a little prayer over here and a little bit of study time here, just enough to get by, or just what you thought you had to do. Here he comes back and he says the same thing. Consider your ways. I'll get into the rest of this at another point, because he makes a strong plea right here, and it's very simple. But the first question is to look at it and say, when is it going to be time? When is it going to be enough for you? When are things going to align right? The stars align in your life, be in a perfect place where you feel like, now I can go do what God wants.